Jim Steranko's ComixScene, issue number 3, March, April of 1973, the all-horror issue. Greetings, friends. Today we are looking at Jim Steranko's ComixScene, issue number 3, March of April 1973, the all-horror issue. Let me give you a little background on ComixScene. ComixScene was Jim Steranko's publication through Super Graphics, and it lasted 6 issues from 1972 to 1973 before becoming Mediascene, which picked up with issue number 7 in 1973 and went until 1979. Then, in 1980, Steranko launched Prevue magazine. Now that ran from 1980 to 1994. So let's dive right in. This issue of ComixScene showcases the faces of fear, from the thrilling 30s to the scary 70s. Werewolves, monsters, vampires, ghouls, zombies, the unliving and the undead, the horror characters and comics of yesterday, today, and tomorrow, all wait to greet you on the pages inside. Plus, more news, reviews, and articles than ever before. Special feature, Frogs, a nightmarish parable told in exciting new comic format. Steranko creates his first story in 3 years, a way-out experiment in form and content equal to an 8-page comic story. Enjoy, enjoy! Just a reminder, friends, my film First Man on Mars is brand new on Blu-ray for 2023, loaded with extras and a chance for you to win one of 2 movie props used in the film. Please visit HorrorAnthologyMovies.com for further details. This channel is not monetized, so any purchase you make helps keep the channel alive. Thank you for your patronage. As you can see, ComixScene was definitely much more text-oriented than Mediascene, which we will be looking at in future episodes. But the info inside is invaluable. In the editorial, Steranko begins by saying, "Take a good look around you, and you'll have to agree with us. Horror comics are here to stay. The same trend that surfaced in the 1950s and 1960s has manifested itself again, this time more firmly entrenched in all popular media than ever." On the right, we have future histories of comics planned, and a list of Super Graphics products you can order on the right-hand column. These are all Steranko's books. Of course, The History of Comics #2, fantastic. Steranko Encyclopedia of Superheroes. Get all 3 books for $7.50, folks. Horror on the Newsstand. This is fantastic. We're looking at Marvel, DC, and indie comics that had hit the newsstands in early 1973. I love it that he starts off with an image of Richard Corbin's Fantagore, and he talks about it, and there's a very interesting thing because the magazine is called ComixScene with an X, right? And there's always that talk of what's the difference between comics, C-O-M-I-C-S, versus comics, C-O-M-I-X. I think Richard Corbin sums it up very well in this quote. "There are all kinds of differences between the regular comics and the underground comics," states Corbin. "The first underground horror books were tongue-in-cheek parodies of old ECs. Even now, most of the stories have a humorous intent. The most obvious differences to the casual observer are that the undergrounds are mostly black and white, the artwork is sometimes amateurish, and there is an emphasis on everything that is forbidden to the regular comics. The underground stories are usually creations of an individual and can be good or bad, but are usually uneven. The overgrounds are assembly line efforts and are not good or bad, but always even." And so we take a look at some issues here. As I said, Fantagore. Obviously, you have Swamp Thing on the scene, Vault of Evil, Werewolf by Night. I believe that is issue number 6. Of course, Tomb of Dracula, and that introduces Blade, the Vampire Slayer. DC is on the scene, of course, with House of Mystery and House of Secrets. And then, of course, we have Marvel with Supernatural Thrillers, issue 4, and issue number 5, which features The Living Mummy. And this is a nice little obit on Bill Everett, the great Bill Everett, by Steranko. Some book reviews here, Cheap Thrills, An Informal History of Pulp Magazines by Ron Goulart. The golden days of fanzines, folks. You gotta love it. I mean, they mentioned, of course, Graphic Story World, which was very hot. Funny World was another really high-end fanzine. And this is very interesting. This article by Byron Preiss here, Cultism versus Consumerism. Let me read a little bit from it. The analysis in this article is based upon an association with the comics industry. It is not meant to be construed as the result of methodical research. Quick, where do you buy your comics? A candy store? All right, where else? Drugstore? Fine. A supermarket? Okay. Now let's change just one word in our question. Where do you buy your comics with an X? The answers change too. A head shop? Sure. A record store? Of course. Through the mail? Uh-huh. Comics and comics. The difference is much more than just 2 letters, and more than just the presence or absence of censorship. It's a whole concept of cultism versus consumerism. The limited run comics as opposed to the mass-produced superbooks of Madison Avenue. Comics are produced in the hundreds of thousands. Few comics reach this level. The companies behind the comics are growing, ambitious, and enterprising, yet commercially impotent. There are many such publishers currently in the business: Rip-Off Press, Apex, Print Mint, LA Comics, and the Krupp Comic Works, as well as a large number of easy come, easy go outfits who spring up periodically. Unfortunately for these young entrepreneurs, their main business outlet continues to be mail order oriented. Small head shops from Boston to Milwaukee to Los Angeles send in requests for certain amounts of certain titles or large quantities of an entire line of comics and receive their order in the mail. With the advent of Skull, Younglust, and Fantagore series of comics, undergrounds are moving towards some regularity and frequency of publication. But as a whole, they are still sporadically released. Those were some prime differences between, of course, comics and comics. Next up, we have national news. Now, that's national periodicals, aka DC Comics. Shazam, Batman, Detective Comics, obviously, G.I. Combat Commandy, The Return of Tarzan, Star Spangled War, Weird War, that was a good one, Jonah Hex, this freaking weirdo, first teen president of the USA, Prez, yes, that was a comic book, and of course Edgar Rice Burroughs' Weird Worlds. Now this double-page spread is by Jim Steranko, and it's kind of like an EC style story, comic story. Of course, there's no dialogue in it, but very EC oriented. It's this biology professor who likes dissecting frogs, and of course it gets down to the point where he himself is dissected by a frog. Very cool art, love it. Love the fact that there's no dialogue in the story. And we move on to Marvel News with issue number 7 of Werewolf by Night, Nick Fury, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., of course, Spider-Man and the Inhumans, Submariner on the scene, of course, issue number 19 of War of the Worlds, and, of course, Kull the Conqueror, number 9, Shauna the She-Devil, Fantastic Four, Amazing Spider-Man, number 123. Creatures on the Loose featuring Thungor, and Captain America and Falcon, issue number 164. Bringing a little horror into the comic book. At the time, horror comics were enjoying an incredible resurgence. Next up, we have a great article by Robert Weinberg called Horror in the Pulps. an issue of Terror Tales from September of 1940, featuring a classic pulp horror cover. You've got the mad scientist, lady in distress, and overall weird setting. Totally agreed with that. And here's a disturbing illustration from the interior of one of those issues, featuring a man holding the head of a woman who he has apparently recently decapitated. Now, Robert Weinberg, for those who are unfamiliar with his work, he has done some fantastic books about Weird Tales Pulp magazine, at least one of which I have. He's definitely an authority on the subject and pulp magazines in general, and I highly recommend his books. If you get a chance, check them out. And here we have the column called Mediascene, which this publication would become at issue number 7. There's a couple of new Avenger books featuring Doc Savage, A Room Full of Horrors by Jack Olek. Mad has their books out. There's a Spy vs. Spy volume, and issue number 34, Rip-Off Mad. And then we have Jack Vance with The Dragon Masters, Perry Rodan. Fritz Leiber, The Big Time. Hierarchies by John Philippent. Warlord of the Air by Michael Moorcock. And of course there's a picture of Roger Moore as James Bond, because they are talking about the brand new release, keep in mind this is 1973, of Live and Let Die, one of my favorite James Bond films. Interestingly enough, it says at the bottom, United Artists is also working on Theater of Blood, starring Vincent Price and Diana Rigg. The picture is produced by John Cohn and Stanley Mann, directed by Douglas Hickox from a script by Anthony Greville Bell. George Powell is still searching for the perfect actor to portray Doc Savage in his upcoming film based on The Man of Bronze. Bill Smith of TV's Laredo series is being considered for the part, but the rumor of Chuck Connors in the title role continues to persist. Powell has said he is using the Steranko portrait of Doc Savage and crew from the center spread of ComixScene number 1 as a guide for his casting. A fantastic article on horror comics of the 1950s. Feast your Vulcan squinties on these pre-code titles. My God. Of course, the great Weird Mysteries, Beware Terror Tales, Weird Tales of the Future. They're all done by the legendary Bernard Bailey. And of course we have Chamber of Chills with a fantastic cover, and Lee Elias with Tomb of Terror cover there, Witchcraft, Atlas titles with Adventures into Weird Worlds, Adventures into Terror, and Stories to Hold You Spellbound. Then we have Nightmare, another issue of Weird Tales of the Future, but this time the cover is by Basil Wolverton. On the back 2 pages, we have ads for the art of Mike Hinge. And this concludes our look at Jim Steranko's ComixScene issue number 3 for March-April of 1973, the all-horror issue. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.